Nope. Plain and simple answer to the last part. Nope. Risk is it should, in my opinion, in my games, it's generally risk equals the reward. If you're on a quest after Excalibur, expect to face things that are going to warrant that risk. You're not going to walk into a room, have the whatever's guarding it explode and drop it on the floor for you. There was a game like that. It was an LP mud called Genocide. You didn't fight anything. You just ran around. Everything just blew up. You gathered it up, and then you killed each other. Now that being said, that's my game. I think that there's nothing wrong with games that give out a lot of treasure. If, again, it's part of the contract I mentioned before, it's part of what you know how the game works. If I sit down to play and going, this is going to be a game where you're going to, one, it's going to be how I decide I want to run it, and you guys are okay with that as players, fine. Also, it also depends on the setting. I mean, I mentioned before there's a series of books by Stan Nichols, where magic, it's a fantasy world, but magic is basically the technology of the day. So an example is, there's a scene where a character's looking down at the street of a city, and there's some kids walking along the street, and their magical glamour of that's their nanny is walking with them, and there's people that are walking dogs, and the dogs are actually magical glamours, not real pets. So magic is, the streetlights are all lit by magic. So there's actually a power grid that's essentially a magical power grid. So in that kind of setting, you're gonna find, if you're taking D&D and you're playing in that setting, you're obviously going to find magic stuff more common. But again, then the flip of that is, and the example I kind of gave in my response was that if you're playing in a game that's a setting like Conan, okay, in Howard's Conan, then the party's cook shouldn't be using a +5 vorpal sword to chop up potatoes for dinner. Balance that the GM has to decide on and has to and control, but it's based on the setting. It really is. If you want, and I said before too in my answer that if you wanted to run a Monty Hall campaign, as they're called, fine. I mean, I'm sure if anyone who played, especially if they played in their early teens first, look back at that once they've gotten older and look back at those games. Those games were probably a little over the top with some of the stuff, but that's just the natural evolution of it. Your taste matures, so your expectations mature with them. It's based because of the old deal he was the host of, and it was just basically a reference to a game that just gives out treasure left and right.
Absolutely correct, 100%. Players make their own choices. They kind of have to reap the benefits, or the repercussions of those choices. In regards to the treasure, I do believe that the risk needs to be balanced with the reward. However, if you constantly pose an increased risk and constantly reward increased treasure, that may kind of set up false hopes for your PCs. For example, I have a player in my game right now who, after one session, being near the base of an actual crypt, where there were objects around them at all times, not all valuable, but still things he could take and possess, just assumed that everything they did and everywhere they went, there would be something of value for him to take. So when we encounter a monster, even a wild beast, who by no means has even likelihood possessions, he expects there to be possessions on that monster somewhere, somehow, every time. So I do agree risk-reward kind of go hand in hand together, but at times it just doesn't happen. You can't get a material reward for every single thing you do. And I think a lot of times social rewards are overlooked. You know, you should have some type of quality and goodness for helping out the poor, instead of asking those poor people for 5 gold after you walk them across the street. Nope. This is one boundary that I do not push. I let it be there. If there is a pitfall that leads to the deepest depths of hell, and your character looks down it and says they jump, they jump. This goes back to the previous question. You know, those players own those characters, and they own their decisions. They have to own them. It's not fair to let someone jump into the pits to hell and then suddenly magically grow angel wings and fly back up. What does that tell to the rest of your party? So in this sense, risk and reward needs to be balanced. Not everything should be accomplishable, and not everything should be unaccomplishable. Your players need to learn that decision-making process and weighing the risks as characters, as what they see before them in the game. Is it seem as though it's something that is accomplishable? Or is it something that's there that they need to take a step back from to go seriously consider their actions?
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. You know, I've had, as I gave an example, I said if a player wants to roll up a character is allergic to bees, you know, that player allergic to bees, and then goes into the local town and starts kicking over, you know, beehives of the local beekeeper, he gets what he gets. I mean, that's the way that is. It's, the GM should not say, oh, all of a sudden the bees don't sting you. You know, I've had, and I've pointed this out to anybody when they start to play in my campaign world. You go where you go. The world's there. You take your characters where you take your characters. That risk is up to you. I don't tailor the risk according to the level of the players per se. If you're gonna go, if there's a known dragon's lair and you want to go try it, by all means. I've had that happen, and the outcome being the expected outcome. So. That that's all on the players. It's not up to the GM to keep. But that can be a fault of a GM too, especially if players become aware of it. But you know, I've also played in games where I had where the GM had storyline the entire campaign so tightly wrapped around characters that when a character died or something happened to a character, that he literally had to scrap the storyline and start over, and that's horrible. So you know, in that kind of position, the GM has 2 options. If they've done that, they've either got to keep this person alive or start over. Well, you know, 4 weeks of starting over got old. You know, 4 weeks, 4 different campaign worlds. That happened one time playing in a game. So it doesn't make for a good game.